November board meeting for the Alexander School District. Can we have roll?
Mrs. Edis?
Here.
Mr. Regan?
Here.
Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
And Mr. Davis?
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Again, welcome. We have the adoption of the agenda, and before we're going to add onto the agenda an executive session for the employment of a public employee. So I will make that motion to adopt the agenda with that addition.
Second.
Mrs. Edis?
Yes.
Mr. Regan?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Public participation for agenda items. We have the consent agenda. Do we have a motion for the consent agenda?
Made.
Second.
Mrs. Edis?
Yes.
Mr. Regan?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
And Mr. Davis?
Yes.
Under Treasurer's recommendations, it is recommended that the Board of Education approve the enclosed updated five-year forecast as required by the Ohio Revised Code 5705.391.
So before I take questions, if you guys have any questions, I just want to go over briefly some of the changes to the forecast because the forecast looks quite a bit different than it has in the past. As you're aware, the state adopted a new funding formula for schools for fiscal '22 starting this year. Part of the change of that new funding formula is they are going to now start funding students where they are educated rather than where what district they reside in, and then transfer the money through open enrollment. So before, Alexander has students who live in other districts but come here through open enrollment. So we would have a large chunk of money in the revenue section from that open enrollment money that we have to receipt into our books. And we'd also have a large chunk of money on our purchase service line item because we'd have to transfer money out for our kids who leave our district through open enrollment and go to other schools. That's not the way that's the state changed the way they do that now. So now, those students who come here at Alexander, even though they live in another district, they're counted as a student in our district, just like any other student who lives in our district. They're all included as part of the enrollment, the ADM count, okay? So by them changing the way they do that, you will no longer see those transfers of money coming in and money going out for open enrollment kids who will no longer see that on the forecast. So that part has been removed. So that's the biggest change that you'll notice from the prior forecast to now. And like I said, you can see that in the revenue side, it's under 1.06, all other operating revenues. As you can see, last year we were 1.9 million of revenues. This year we're only 500,000. Well, that's because 1.2 million of open enrollment that we used to have to receipt onto our books as revenue is no longer accounted for there. And then for the outgoing transfers, that's captured under line 3.03, purchase services. So if you look at last fiscal year 21, we had just over $3 million of expenditures, and then this year we're projecting 1.5. Well, we had over 1.6 million of transfers out that used to be charged as an expense under purchase services. That's no longer going to be charged as an expense anymore. So that's the new way that the biggest change that the funding formula did to the way the forecast looks. Other than that, I mean, there's some minor adjustments, some slight increase on the income tax, just based on the actual data that we have now that's been coming in. It's really running very close to what the state projected that it would be. The collections seem to have came in quicker than what they thought, but that varies from school to school when they start a brand new income tax. but the overall total collections is running really close to being in line with what they projected. See, other than that, if you guys have any questions, glad to answer them.
That's, we'll move it to the floor and start discussion, so I'll make that motion.
Seconded.
All right, discussion.
So Aaron, if I heard you right just now, you said last year we received $1.2 million in for students, and we put out 1.6 million.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep. And now that 1.6 is a combination of open enrollment and community schools and scholarship students.
Yeah.
Those three areas, all three of those areas, they no longer will be charged as an expense any longer. So instead, if a kid who may live in our district and they go to Athens or Hogland or whatever district they go to, they'll just not be counted in our enrollment at all for funding purposes.
So it's a cleaner book, essentially.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, because you got to think about it. I mean, in our district, our open enrollment, just comparing open enrollment in to open enrollment out, we were actually positive. I mean, we had more open enrollment kids coming in than going out until you add in the community school and the scholarship students. But, you know, some districts, they may have lots of kids going out and very few, if any, coming in. And if you look at their, you know, financials, that looks like a $1 million expense. Well, they're really not spending any money. That's just the state saying we're deducting $6,000 per kid from you and sending it to the district that is educating them. But then it's booked as an expense for that district when in reality they're not spending anything.
Right.
But it's no longer going to be done that way.
Other discussion? And roll.
Mrs. Edis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Under superintendent's recommendations, item A, it's recommended that the Board of Education approve the memorandum of understanding with OPSI and AFSCME regarding newly hired bus drivers.
So moved.
Second, discussion. Roll.
Mrs. Edis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
Yes.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Item B, it is recommended that the Board of Education accept the enclosed letter of retirement resignation from Jennifer Enos effective December 1, 2021.
Moved.
Seconded.
Discussion? I'd just like to say thank you for your service. And so, roll.
Mrs. Edis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes.
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins,
I'd also like to say thanks to Mrs. Enos for all that she's done and all of her support, and the whole Enos family for that matter. And unfortunately, I accept.
and Mr. Davis.
Yes.
Before we go to the executive session, I thought we would, is there any business initiated by board members? Board reports? Or public participation on any item? Our next scheduled meeting is supposed to be Wednesday, December 15th, but we're going to have to adjust that. Does Monday, December 13th work? Lindy, can you think of school activities?
Double check here.
Now until February.
Because I know we did Wednesdays specifically for winter time was the least. So we could move it up to the 8th, but trying to keep that week in between there.
13th or the 8th is fine.
And Fred, you said Monday works?
Monday works for me, the 8th. is
Good.
what? That's a Wednesday?
That-
Wednesday.
The
8th is a Wednesday?
I'm gone that week.
You're going the 13th?
I'm gone the whole week.
Of the,
I'm good the 13th.
good, the 13th?
Yeah,
All right.
13th, yep.
All right,
Just
so
the week before.
would be Monday, December 13th at 7 PM. All right.
Gifts exchange still on.
At this time, I'll make a motion to enter executive session for the employment of a public employee.
Second?
Roll.
Mrs. Edis?
Yes.
Mr. Regan?
Yes.
Mr. Barnes?
Yes.
Mr. Collins?
Yes.
Mr. Davis?
Yes.
We won't be taking the action at this point, so we'll just be adjourning.
Thing on the agenda, December 8th, is the kindergarten program.
So we,
13th?
I'm out of town that week.
Oh, okay.
We can't have it.
what time's the,
I think it's around 7. But it's just kindergarten. The parking lot will be full, just remember that.
okay.
You said that was the 8th, so, not the 13th.
It's the
It's
13th.
on the
It's
13th.
It's on the 13th, okay.
Is everybody still okay with that? I guess we have to come back into session, so we're,
Yep.
we don't have to.
We're good.
All right, we are back in session. Is everybody still good with the 13th at 7 PM next meeting?
Yeah.
I don't have
All right.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
All right, so do we have a motion for adjournment?
So moved.
Second. I can get the first one there.
Mrs. Edis,
Yes.
Mr. Regan,
Yes,
Mr. Barnes,
Yes.
Mr. Collins.
Yep.
Mr. Davis.
Yes.
thank you, everybody.